Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another of our lovely webinars. We try to run these every week, and this week we're going to be talking about applying to Oxford and Cambridge as an international student. I'm joined by my colleague Edward this week. Edward, say hello.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you guys.
Fab. I think we'll get into it. So as I said, this week we're talking about applying as an international student. This was years and years ago a smaller category because there was a separate category for students applying from the European Union, but now it's all international. So it makes things a little bit simpler. Next week, and this will probably be relevant as well for at least some of you, we're going to be talking about applying for law at Oxford and Cambridge. So if you're interested in applying for that, please do join us again. I'm sure we'll cover one or two of the same points, but it should be sufficiently different. International students. The first and sort of most obvious question we can talk about is the differences between the application process in the UK and in the US. We could do a whole presentation on this, but I've just really boiled it down to the simple little things here. We'll then talk a little bit about what your chances of getting admissions are, which subjects are more or less competitive, and then we'll talk a little bit about the best strategy for approaching an application to the UK. So without further ado, we talk about the differences between the US and the UK application process. So the application systems, the kind of application philosophy, they're really very different actually between the US and the UK, which is something that students aren't always expecting. And so if you want to take the application you've put together that you're sending off to Stanford, to Michigan, to Chapel Hill, just copying that over into your UK application isn't going to work for a number of reasons, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. The good thing here is that the requirements for UK universities are quite a lot simpler than those for universities in the US. It's all done through a single portal. There aren't early decisions. There isn't as much complexity there. And well, we'll get into it. So the first thing to know is that the UK university applications are done through a system called UCAS. This is a single online system that works for every university in the UK, and you apply all at once. If you're applying for Oxford and Cambridge, you'll be doing that in, what is it? The deadline is in just under 3 months. Now, the thing to bear in mind here, that is a big difference from the US, is that your application to university in the UK will be based 100% on the academic ability. So that'll be the grades that you produce throughout your school career, whether you're doing the US curriculum, whether you're doing an international baccalaureate, French baccalaureate, whatever you're doing. That alone will be the basis for the decision about whether to offer you a place or not. You can be an Olympic swimmer. You can be an Olympic swimmer who's given a lot of money to the university. You can be, you could be called, I don't know, David Kennedy, and you could be one of the Kennedys. All of those things are nice, but they aren't going to make a difference to your application to the UK universities. They put a real effort into leaving all of that stuff out. To sort of push this home, I've got a clip from an admissions tutor at Cambridge, just spelling this out for any of you who are surprised by this news. So this is Dr. Philip Knox at Cambridge explaining how they go about choosing which students to choose.
So I suppose if you are extremely interested and excited by things that are not related to the subject of English, like sport or music or something like that, that's great. But we're probably not that interested actually in that element of your well-rounded self.
he puts it a little bluntly there. He's talking about applications for English, but it goes for any subject. The important thing is your academic ability, not your success at the Olympics, not your family connections. None of that stuff is important. And so that is the big difference from the US application process. And so that's something you need to really have sort of at the forefront of your mind if you're applying to the UK, that stuff, tempting as it is to mention, and if you've been working on your application to the United States where those things are important, it can be difficult to completely let go of them, but you can put them in your application, but they're just going to be ignored. If you put a paragraph about that, someone's just going to do a big line through it and go, not interested. Now, I want to draw a little bit of a line here as well to say, this is about things that aren't specifically relevant to the subject you're applying for. So if you're applying to study politics, it doesn't matter how good at fencing you are. But if you have been doing work outside of school that actually is directly relevant, if we think about politics, doing some kind of political campaigning, doing some kind of research, doing things that are actually related to the subject, rather than just being impressive on their own terms, those things are worthwhile, and those things you should definitely include in your application. But just to bear in mind that you need to be able to link everything back to the subject you're applying to as directly as you can, because if you are just showing off what an all-round good person you are, that's nice, but this is about academic ability, not about character, basically. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the chances you have. This is the part of the work that I really specialize in the company, working on data, so that we have a really clear sense of what works and what doesn't when we're talking to students. And so what I'm going to put forward here, this is all backed up by spreadsheets, which I'm more than happy to share if needs be, to sort of show our working. And I'm hoping that Edward's going to be able to help me here as well, because this is perhaps one he's seen before. So have you ever worked with our pie chart before, Edward?
I have, yes. So I can talk everyone through it, if that's okay, Matt.
Absolutely, and I'll fill in anything you might have missed, but I'm sure you know what you're doing.
All right, perfect. Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Edward, and I'm one of the admissions consultants here at UniAdmissions. So what you can see on your screens here at the moment is what we call the pie chart, the Oxbridge Pie Chart, and essentially what it talks you through a little bit how the admissions tutors at the universities like to make decisions on the candidates on whether or not they receive an offer to study at Oxbridge. So as you can see, 40% of the weighting, it goes on the admission test scores. So I'm sure, for example, if you're applying to study physics, you'll be sitting the physical aptitude test, and 40% of the decision will be based on your score on the physics aptitude test. And then the other 40% will be based on your performance at the interview stage. So as you can see, those make up 80% of the application weighting. And the remaining 20% is 10% on your predicted grades and 10% on everything else. So hopefully that kind of paints a picture on how you need to concentrate all of your energy during the application process. Back to you, Matt.
So yeah, as Edward says, there's a lot of weight put on the admissions tests in this process. And the reason for that, and this is particularly relevant for students applying from outside the UK, is if you're coming from a range of different exam systems, that admissions test is going to be the only thing that every student applying for the subject will have done that's the same. So it's the only opportunity that the universities have to make that direct comparison between the students. Now, of course, the information put into the UCAS statement, the reference, the personal statement, all of these things are also important. But that admissions test, which unlocks the interview, which is, of course, the most important part, is really key to getting taking your application forward, and is why we put so much emphasis on it. Now, in terms of your chances more broadly, the first thing to understand is that it is straightforwardly more competitive to get a place at Oxford or Cambridge applying from outside the UK than from inside the UK. Now, this varies quite a lot depending on subject, but broadly speaking, UK students applying from outside the UK get offers at Oxford and Cambridge for about 9% of the time, whereas for UK applicants, it's roughly double that, around 20% of the time. Now, this is in spite of there being very close to as many applicants from outside the UK as in the UK every year. We think something around 20,000 compared to 30,000 from inside. And there are a number of reasons for this. The biggest reason we find in our research is that international students are much more likely to apply for the most competitive courses. So if we look at courses that have a relatively small number of applicants per place, subjects such as modern languages, such as music, such as classics, we find that there are many fewer international students applying for these courses. And that means that they're putting themselves at a little bit of a disadvantage elsewhere, where they'll be putting a lot of applications in for the most competitive subjects. And we see this really in a kind of focusing on a few really popular subjects. So in the last cycle, something of the order of 1 in 12 people applying to Oxford from outside the UK were applying for one course, which was for economics and management. And so you end up with, what did we say? We had something like 20,000 students applying from outside the UK. So you end up with 12 times 20, that's what, 240 students from outside the UK applying for that one subject. And that's a really large number of people for a subject that probably has fewer than 100 places to begin with. And that's before you factor in people applying from inside the UK. So what you have there is a situation where you just have so many people crowding into one particular area that it makes the applications process more competitive. What this means is also that you'll see that international students are much less likely to apply for the less well-known courses at Oxford or Cambridge. They'll tend to gravitate to the ones with the sort of the big names and the big reputations. The other thing to think about here is medicine. The UK government has a very strict limit on the number of non-UK doctors that it will train each year. This is because once you go to medical school in the UK, if you're a UK applicant, you are pretty much locked into spending a certain amount of time inside the NHS. And because this wouldn't be the case for students applying from outside the UK, there is a much smaller number of places available to them because the spaces in medical school are needed to staff the NHS, basically. So at Oxford, nearly 700 students will apply every year for around 10, sometimes years it's 9 places to study medicine at Oxford. So you're looking at a huge chunk of that success rate coming down just to medicine. So for students applying from the UK, you will have something like 8 or 9 students applying per place to study medicine at Oxford. And so you'll want to be in around the top 10 of the applicant pool, so scoring probably in the top 10 or 15% in the BMAT if you're applying from the UK. But because there are so many fewer spaces available for students outside the UK, you would have to be scoring higher than that again as an international student. Now, we did have success with, I believe, 2 students last year who were working with us who were able to get places, one at Oxford and one at Cambridge. So it's something that we have had experience with. But you will need to have really spectacular BMAT scores to be in with a chance of applying for medicine, and that's because of this hard legal limit that the universities have to work with. So this sort of takes us to the kind of the strategy point, which is what I'm going to talk about briefly before Ed and I talk a little bit more about the support that we offer as a company. I would say the first thing to do is to look at the full breadth of subjects available, whether that's at Oxford or at Cambridge, and consider subjects that are perhaps slightly less well known. You know, have a look at something like material science. If you've been thinking about economics, having a look at land economy, making sure that you are fully aware of the range of subjects that are available and that you're not just picking the ones with the big names. You want to make sure that you're preparing for your interview a really long way in advance. Particularly if English isn't your first language, then you're inevitably going to get a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to that format. So really practicing that months ahead so that you're ready to ready to really perform at your best. Think about what you are bringing to the universities as well. You know, as an international student, you're bringing a different set of perspectives, a different set of ideas. Make sure that you are sort of conscious of what you're doing there, that you're including that in your personal statement. You're thinking about what your motivation is. You know, the purpose of one of the purposes of having international students is to have a really interesting, diverse body of students. And so think about what it is that you're bringing to the table that you can show in the interview and the personal statement throughout to show that you're going to be an interesting part of the university community. And the last point is, as we mentioned earlier, you just want to make sure you're getting a really good score on an admissions test, whether it's the BMAT or another test, making sure that you're scoring, you know, so high that there's no chance of you not getting that interview, and then getting that place from there. Now, there are a whole range of things that we can offer in terms of help. So I'm going to hand over to Edward briefly while I blow my nose, who's going to talk a little bit about the role of one-to-one tuition and what we do.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So essentially, we have the way we structure our programs is we want you to essentially become best friends with your tutor, right? He's an expert and bespoke tuition, and he's going to make sure that he focuses his energy on what's most important to you and what you feel like you need to work on the most. That's the number one thing. Number two, you get the chance, as it says here, learn from a current student or recent graduate in your subject. So your tutor is going to have plenty of experience and plenty of knowledge and understanding of the subject which you are planning to apply to, and as such is going to be able to provide you bespoke knowledge and bespoke advice, which you quite frankly aren't going to be able to get anywhere else. That's number two. Number three is going to be your first point of contact in preparing for your interview. And on top of that, you're going to have a panel of subject specialists in addition to your lead tutor, and all of them together are going to make sure that you are as prepared as you can possibly be in to walk into your interview as confident as you can possibly be. So that's everything from this slide. Matt, would you like to take over from here?
Yes, thanks, Ed.
No worries.
So yeah, as he says, it's the one-to-one tuition is hugely important, but what we have found is that the tuition only really works once you have been able to explore your strengths, your weaknesses, to really figure out what you are finding challenging about the process, so that you can then focus in on the things that are going to make the biggest difference. So one of the ways we do this is by providing our own set of resources. So these are developed in-house at substantial cost and at work from the team. And the aim here is to make sure that when you're revising for the admissions test, say, that you've been through hundreds of practice questions, and so that when you come to speak to your tutor, you know which areas it is that you're finding difficult, and you can really focus the expertise of your tutor on what you find difficult rather than wasting time on what you find easy. And with our programs, you get access to hundreds of practice questions, all of our books, of which there are now something of the order of 100, lots of practice interview questions, just loads of resources for you to develop yourself in your own time, so that those tuition sessions, you are really maximizing the value you get out of the tutor, because you've gone and done the homework that's made sure that you really know what you're talking about once you get to that point. Another way we do that is through our enrichment seminars. So these run every Sunday, so that's in just under 12 hours. And that's a discussion that you have with a tutor and other students who are applying to the same sort of subject group to you. And that is an opportunity to discuss high-level academic ideas, to have a look at a little bit of a presentation, to really get the hang of the style of communication thinking that you're going to need to use, not just in the interview, but in university once you're already there. This is something we added, I think, 2 years ago as a new feature in our programs. The idea being we wanted to make sure that people were really well practiced in the kind of discussion and engagement that's really important for these subjects, and for communicating your ideas. And we also, sort of the last thing, are the day courses. So if you are working with us, we'll also have an intensive day course for your admissions test, for the interview. The interview ones are particularly exciting. We get often close to 100 students at a time, and we'll be then matching them up with tutors, and you can have a full day of practicing interview technique, getting feedback, seeing what other people are doing, really understanding how to go about the interview and really getting that practice in an intensive fashion. It's my favorite part of the year because it's the chance to meet so many of the students we've worked with, to get a real sense of the value of the work we do. But most of all, it means that you have the opportunity to make the kinds of mistakes that you would perhaps be at risk of making in the interview itself, but you can do them easy. Do them easy? You could do them earlier. So if you're worried that you might make a fool of yourself in the real interview, the best way to do that is to make a fool of yourself in the practice interview instead. And while you can try doing that with a teacher from your school, with a parent, with a friend, to really recreate that nervousness, it needs to be a stranger, it needs to feel a little bit pressured, and that's something that we're able to do, and that we find is really valuable. I myself think back to my own interview at Oxford, let's say 3 years ago. Does that sound true? Does that look true? And I remember making a bit of a fool of myself then. And it's always reminds me of the value of being properly prepared. I think, when was that? I think George Bush was still president. It was a long time ago. The other thing to say is that we're really pleased that our program of support seems to work. We have an Oxbridge success rate that is in excess of 3 times the national average in the UK, and we also punch above our weight substantially with international students. We're well on our way to getting our 500th offer, which I think is due sometime this year if the numbers check out, which is something we're really excited about. And again, although not quite as impressive as these numbers, our success rate with international medics, getting them, although not necessarily a place at Oxford or Cambridge, but a place in the UK universities is pretty good. And it's something we've put a lot of effort into over the years. Our records compare pretty favorably with even the most expensive schools. So while we don't quite have the snazzy outfits that you would expect at Eton, we do have comparable results, which is nice. We're also, I think, a little bit better value for money than Eton, depending on your tastes. If you'd like to read a little bit more about the work we do, then I recommend having a look on Trustpilot to get a sense of how people are responding to our support. I've excerpted a couple here, but there are hundreds on Trustpilot for you to have a look at to get a sense of how we work, to understand the relationships we build with parents and with students. And I've been saying this for weeks and still no one has done it. If someone will write a lovely Trustpilot review about me, about how nice I am, how good these webinars are, I will replace these samples with that review in this presentation for the next several months. So if you want to see your name in lights here, all you have to do is say something nice about me on Trustpilot, and it'll go straight into the presentation deck. Oh no, that's not what I wanted. Sorry. That's from a different presentation. The other thing to talk about is if you have enjoyed listening to me, enjoyed listening to Edward, you may also enjoy listening to my colleague Will and our boss Rohan. They have a podcast which you can access through our website, which I very much recommend. They've finally invited me to appear on it, so I do now feel confident and happy recommending it, but I do recommend doing that. And you can also see on our website, if you prefer me to them, which obviously you would, we have, I don't know how many hours. I would guess it's an enormous number. I'm going to take a guess, actually. I would say, so probably about 60, yeah, probably about 50 hours of archives of these open days. So if you would like to spend the entire weekend listening to me all day, all night, and quite a lot of Monday, just go onto our website and you can listen back to recordings of all of these along with the slides. I wouldn't recommend anyone do that. That's far too much of my company. But if you would like to, then, you know, do that, then write a lovely review on Trustpilot about how much you enjoyed listening to nothing but these webinars for a week. I think that would be wonderful. I would love it. What we're going to do now is take some questions. I can see a few questions have already come through. I think we'll start on those. If you want to drop those in, then we'll carry on with questions for a little while before we close things out. Hamza asked about what the test is for the UK. So there isn't a single test for applying for universities in the UK like there is in the States. There will be, for most subjects, for most universities, there's no test at all. It's just a case of looking at the results you have from your high school. But for Oxford and Cambridge, they will ask you to do a subject-specific test for most subjects to get a sense of how you compare with other applicants. So if you're applying to study physics at Oxford, you'll want to do the physics test. If you want to study chemistry, there'll be a chemistry test. If you want to study English, there'll be an English test. And as you apply, then you'll be prompted to register for the test, and you can read about it on the subject website as well. We provide support for every test for Oxford and Cambridge, for tests at other universities as well. But unlike the States, there isn't one test that you do. You put in the information about your high school success, you take the test for your subject if you're applying for Oxford or Cambridge, and you write your personal statement, which is the kind of like the personal essay component in the American system. Hasmer asks about the weighting of O-levels and A-levels. So if you're applying, for most students, you won't have your A-level results yet, so you won't know what they are, but your school will be able to provide you with a prediction of your A-levels, and you'll have your O-level results already. The O-levels tend to be less important than the admissions tests, because the O-levels are from a couple of years ago, you've got smarter, you've changed. But it's still important to have credible grades there to put in as part of your question. And we have a few questions about the Ucat and the Bmat. Cool. So you don't need to be. Yes, the first question is: do you need to be in the top 2% for Bmat and Ucat? So each university only looks at one. Some universities care about the Bmat, some universities care about the Ucat. They're not going to be interested in both. So depending on the university, it'll be a case of scoring really well in whichever one it is that university cares about. Exactly what score you would need to be in the top 5 or 10%, I'm not certain of off the top of my head. I would think for the Bmat, you would be looking to get about 6.1 at 6.13, 3.5A. The Ucat scores, it's a little more complicated because they're more complicated numbers. But you can have a look. We have information on our website. There's great information on the Ucat Consortium website as well about what scores correspond to what percentile. So I would have a look at that. And here we go. Gayatri asks about the difference between the Ucat and the Bmat. So the differences are quite substantial. This is something we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So if you give me a minute, what I will do is I will send a link through to the open day we did about this, because it will be easier to have a look at that than for me to try and sum it up here again when I've already very nicely outlined it. Now this is where this gets exciting, because I don't actually know how to find the old open days on the website because I've never watched them. You'll never believe this, but I don't actually watch these. I just make them.
I can have a go at summarizing it, Matt, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to sort of fill while I try and find the link for the old recording.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, the difference between the Ucat and Bmat is that on the Ucat side, you've got more. They're trying to test a little bit more of your aptitude, whereas on the Bmat, they're interested in both the aptitude and your knowledge, your scientific knowledge. So the UCAT stands for UK Clinical Aptitude Test, whereas BMAT actually stands for Biomedical Aptitude Test. So on the BMAT, they're looking for, not only are they looking for your aptitude to be a doctor, but also do you have the basic A-level knowledge which is required to take forward into your medical studies. So as you can see, BMAT is a bit more comprehensive than the UCAT. And I think another key difference is that the BMAT is used primarily by Oxford and Cambridge. There are a couple of other unis, particularly in the Russell group, which have opted to use the BMAT over the last few years. But I think the UCAT is a more of a general admission exam, which is preferred amongst the universities. Yeah, those are just a couple of differences that I've noticed.
Fab. Thanks, Edward. I've managed to find a link that was beautifully done to fill in the time. So I'd say yes. I spoke about this about 6 weeks ago, so I recommend having a look at that, because I'll just say it again, but this way it's recorded. Patrick asks about helping younger applicants narrow down their subject choices. Yeah, this is something we spend a lot of, we work with quite a few students on. We do have what we call the Head Start program, so for students who are still a couple of years away from applying, and that really focuses on getting a feeling for the breadth of the subject area you're interested in, figuring out what niches kind of work for you, what things you're passionate about, what things you're not. And that is really helpful if you're still sort of trying to figure out which subject you want to go for exactly. It's quite common for students to not necessarily have, fully decided until quite late in the day. And so we find that, planning ahead for that is really helpful. And of course, we find that the levels of success we're able to achieve with students, there's a very clear relationship between the longer we spend with you and the higher that success rate is. So that's something that we can definitely have a conversation with you about. I'm hoping, it's got stuck. There should be a little animation running now of how to get in touch with us. So you can sign up for a free consultation. That's with Edward or one of his colleagues. And that is a completely fee-free, obligation-free chat to get to know you, figure out what it is that you're hoping to achieve, and how we can help you at what you're aiming for. Kahana has a question about AP courses. So Oxford and Cambridge are perfectly happy with the students applying from the US. It's hardly unusual. Lots of students apply from outside the UK, and the biggest pool of applicants there is from the States. I'm just double checking my information. So generally speaking, they will like to see 3 or 4 APs at grade 5, aligned with the subjects that you are planning to study. So if you are looking at studying a science subject, say physics, they'll be looking for students who have done well in physics C, physics 1 and 2. And the same goes for other AP grades. So it's a little bit fiddly to work out, because the conversions to the UK system don't work perfectly. But it's something that we are more than happy to sort of talk through, as I do have a colleague who knows a little bit more about America than I do, who's able to sort of work through the exact stuff to do. The other thing to bear in mind is that Oxford and Cambridge have figured out what's going on with the superscore. So they will ask you to send in all of your scores from all of your attempts on the SAT. And the same for the ACT. So unfortunately, the kind of super scoring trick that I know that's become common in the States doesn't quite work. Larkin asks a couple of questions about applying as a graduate. I'm not certain of the exact GPA conversion between Canada and the UK, but broadly speaking, they will be very interested in students who are applying from, with good GPAs as graduates. I would say in this instance, as long as you are scoring in the kind of top third of the students at your university, you should be able to put in a pretty competitive application. But with Oxford particularly, which you've asked about, It's worth being quite strategic about college choice and things like that when it comes to sending your application. So that's something that'd be really good to have a conversation with you about directly, actually, because we have some really interesting findings around open applications in colleges, particularly from students who are applying after a first undergraduate degree. So please do get in touch. That may even be a call I can pick up if someone needs me to, Edward. And I think we'll take, just a couple more. Hamza asks about the sort of the most effective extracurriculars for the putting into your personal statement. So, do you have any particular examples from students you've spoken to recently, Edward, about extracurriculars that have really impressed you?
I wouldn't say I've got any particular examples, but if I was to give you some general advice, Hamza, I'd say that the closer it's related to your subject, the subject you're hoping to study, the better. So, for example, if you're hoping to study political science or politics at Oxford, then the best thing that I can think of to do is to try to get some work experience working within some government role or closely related to in that space, if that makes sense. So I think that's probably the best thing I would say to do.
Yeah, what you want to be able to do is to draw a really clear line between the things you've learned in the work experience and why it makes you a good candidate for the subject. So if I was applying, like in this example, to study politics, if I had done my work experience, I don't know, in a hospital, then there might be a link I can draw there, but it's a little bit fiddly. It's not obvious how the hospital is necessarily relevant to the politics. Maybe I could try and explain it, but I think it would be a little bit too much. Whereas if you can get some work experience with a local politician where you are, if you can get involved in some kind of political cause, if you could even do some charitable or volunteering work that has a political dimension to it, something to do with poverty or development or human rights, something like that, that's going to make it much easier for you to draw that connection. What you don't want to be doing is, and I've seen this so often in personal statements, you will have a student who has something that really isn't very relevant, and they'll say, the reason I would be a really good student the reason I would be a great student to study history is because I'm really hardworking, which you can tell from how good at rugby I am. And it doesn't really translate. You can kind of say, oh, I have all these great leadership skills from being captain of the rugby team, but it's not very convincing. It's too big a connection you're trying to make. You want something that's quite clear and quite direct when it comes to showing that the experiences you've had have really informed why you'll be good at the subject, rather than the kind of a generic. Because in the rugby example, right, there's no reason that I can't say I would be a good doctor because I'm so good at rugby, or I would be good at physics because I'm so good at rugby. You're not drawing a clear link between the subject and the extracurricular. There needs to be a link there that wouldn't work for another subject, if that makes sense. I think we will call it a day there, if that's all right with you, Edward.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And if I could just add one more thing to the point relating to work experience, I would say that universities understand that not everyone has got access to politicians, as we talked about earlier. So if you can do something as simple as joining a debating society at your school, that is still going to stand you very much in favour in the eyes of an admissions tutor at Oxbridge, in sort of demonstrating that you've got a clear interest in the subject which you're looking to study at university. So I think that is something which is quite important for you guys to keep in mind. If you can sort of demonstrate a genuine passion for your discipline, that will really stand you favourable in getting an interview at Oxbridge.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Edward. It's not about having access to the fanciest kind of work experience that's available locally. It's about showing what you've done, how it's demonstrated your interest, and how you've really benefited from it. So it can be something really simple in your local community, and that's going to be just as important as you having contact with a national politician. if you've learned something from it, if it shows your passion, that's going to be much more useful in that instance than something that not everyone would have access to. So as I said, we'll call it a day there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's been lovely to see you, Edward. It's been lovely to see so many bright and cheerful virtual faces. And we'll catch up with you all next week when we'll be talking about applying to study law. So enjoy your weekend and next week, and we'll speak to you then. Bye-bye, everyone.